Welcome to the Diversity and Inclusion on Air podcast. This podcast is a program of the American Association of Veterinary Medical Colleges Diversity Matters Initiative. The podcast explores various issues related to diversity and inclusion in the veterinary profession and provides the AAVMC an opportunity to offer ongoing diversity programming to our member institutions as well as all veterinary professionals. My name is Dr. Lisa Greenhill, and I'm the Chief Diversity Officer here at the AAVMC. I'm sure that everyone watching and listening has probably heard about the term and the phrase gender-affirming care in the media. Certainly, it has been a hot topic, especially over probably the last 2 to 3 years, as more and more states and state legislatures specifically have been moving to try to limit access to gender affirming care more often than not, specifically for persons under the age of 18. It's been characterized, it being gender affirming care, has been characterized a number of different ways, leading to a lot of misunderstandings about what it is and what it's not. And while the characterizations of gender affirming care tend to focus on kind of major surgical procedures that no one actually wants to name and talk about specifically, to just leave it to your imagination, we find that there are lots and lots of activities and medical care that everyone, including cis folks, also make use to kind of help better align our individual selves with our idealized version of ourselves and our expressed gender, whatever that may be. And if that's true, then in previous topics and episodes, then well, what about animals? Like, do they ever need gender affirming care? And what would and does that look like? And how do we as humans think about and conceptualize such care in the veterinary context? So my guest today will join me in kind of pondering these questions over the next hour. And I'd like to welcome Dr. Sam Morello, Ewan Wolff, and Dane Whitaker to the podcast. Thank you, everybody. All right.
Thanks for having us here.
Yeah, so as is our custom on the show, I have my guests self-introduced. So Ewan, you are in the upper corner for me today. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, my name is Ewan Wolff, they, them pronouns. I am an internist at Blue Pearl in Northeast Portland in Oregon. And I'm also industry liaison for PrideVMC.
All right. How about Sam?
Hi, thanks, Lisa, and everybody for having me here. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a large animal surgeon by training, and I spent over a decade in academia. And now I'm the Assistant Director of Education and Research for the AVMA. So I work for the students rather than standing directly in front of them.
Awesome. And last but certainly not least, Dane.
Hey, my name is Dr. Dane Whitaker. My pronouns are he, him. And I just want to say thank you, Lisa, for having this podcast, because I identify first as a transgender man and secondly as a transgender veterinarian. So to have the opportunity to have these conversations with all these good people is just really, it's a topic that's near and dear to my heart. So thank you again. I am by day a small animal relief veterinarian in the Sacramento and San Francisco Bay Area. I also take care of sick and injured marine mammals at the Marine Mammal Center in Sausalito, California. And the third hat that I wear in the profession is I am the immediate past president of PrideVMC, the group that Ewan mentioned. We are the LGBTQ plus national and international vet group.
Awesome. And yes, we are filming, we are sliding. Can we believe that we're this late at the end of this week? We'll be halfway through June. It's like this year is kind of rolling by. Happy Pride.
Happy Pride.
Happy Pride.
Happy Pride.
Pride. So, Dane, I'm going to pose this question to you first then. How do you broadly, let's just kind of try to get our arms around what is gender affirming care?
Yeah, I think that for me, the easiest way to define this is sort of in the lens of my own experience. And gender affirming care for me was having access to the care that I needed from both sort of the mental health field and my doctor, to align what I felt on the inside with how I wanted to look on the outside, or at least, what society thinks that that should look like. It was really having access to medical care that allowed me to be my authentic self. So basically, affirming the gender that I feel inside and that I want to express.
Mhm. All right. So, how are, Sam, and you and I chatted off camera earlier, how might we also think about, I guess, broadening that? Or is there a need to broaden, the way that we talk about it? How might we define it?
So gosh, I think that if we're talking about it in the context of veterinary medicine, that can be a lot of different things, and
Sure.
maybe in the scope of this conversation. So, how we utilize medicine, mental health, psychology, our interactions with people to affirm the gender that they are, the gender that they want to be, the gender that we are helping to endorse them as. If we're even talking about our pets and the animals that we're caring for, that's a different definition too, or it could be, right? Like that could be a more complex issue when we start to talk about sterilization or behavioral modification through the use of different procedures and drugs, which I think we're not going to dive into that right now, but I think that opens up maybe a different conversation, and perhaps even as a different lens. I'm going to turf that to the people here that are experts, like Dane and Ewan, because I'm not. But this, when I got invited to this and felt perhaps a little bit overwhelmed because it's not an experience I have personally, but I've thought a lot about gender through my work and my research, and I realized I've spent a lot of time dealing with the concept of that through some of what I've done surgically and medically in the field. So, I'm actually curious as to your thoughts on that. So, I guess we're going to get to that.
Yeah, yeah. I will just say before I ask Ewan your thoughts. So I took for folks that are long-term listeners or viewers of the show. I have a dog, Barkley. Barkley is sex male, right? We went to Pride this weekend, big party, hanging out. He had on his little t-shirt, and it was like, oh my God, she's so cute. Okay, so we also gender the animals, and like smaller animals. I found as a small dog person, almost always like the default is, oh my gosh, she's so cute. How old is she, or what's her name? And I'm like, his name is Barkley. Oh, okay, got it. Right. So there's this kind of perception thing that is happening, and so I'm always like, okay, like let me put on this t-shirt, like and I'm like, does a muscle shirt actually still send on a muscle shirt on a dog, does that still message male? I don't know if it messages male, but like maybe not, I don't know. Anyway, thoughts, Ewan?
So we're asking specifically from a veterinary standpoint.
No, just in general, kind of, what do we think, or how do we conceptualize gender affirming care?
So I would say like from the standpoint of non-veterinary medicine, because I think there's interesting stuff to unpack from the standpoint of human perceptions of sex and gender in dogs, but and cats. But from the standpoint of human care, I think really there's kind of three basic categories. One of them is social, and social transition looks differently for well, and I'm subbing in transition for gender affirming care. Social gender affirmation looks different for different people. So, for some people that may really go along with gender expression, i.e., how you're presenting yourself to other people and how that, fits with particular gender identities that people have that are preconceived. But people don't have to go through changes in gender expression in order to kind of socially transition. Social transition may look for some people like saying, hey, these are my pronouns, and they're working through their own thing. And, it may not be something where, you don't have to have like a big parade and fireworks and stuff like that. It may be as simple as changing some details. Medical transition implies really hormone blockade and hormone replacement therapy. So, to your point, as far as youth gender affirming care, a lot of youth gender affirming care, at least initially, is hormone blockers. And that's really, giving people a couple of years to think about what their decisions are as far as whether they pursue hormone therapy or anything else. So, a lot of the things that people are up in arms about, they're literally up in arms to a large extent about the majority of the people out there being either on hormone blockers to give them some time to think, or hormones. Like the majority of trans youth and non-binary youth are not getting any sort of surgical anything done for them. And then from the standpoint of other medical transition things, that may also include things like giving trans women or non-binary people who want the ability to do things like breastfeed their babies. That's a very important part of gender affirmation for people. And frankly, something that I wish had been possible for me. It was not something that I knew was even a possibility. And then, there's stuff from a surgical transition standpoint, which covers a whole bunch of different things, from things like, doing hair implants to things like top surgery that you already alluded to, as far as, people who are, kind of non-binary mask or trans men, to things like facial feminization surgery or vocal cord surgery or stuff along those lines. And every human being's an individual, so what their gender affirmation looks like is going to be very individual.
Yeah, exactly. So having said all that, then, why is this terminology the boogeyman, like, or boogie person? How about that? Why is it so like, hair on fire for folks?
Yeah,
Why is it upsetting?
that is a question that I often ask myself because, as a trans person in the current climate in the country today, with all this legislation that's happening, it's scary and it's hard not to take it personally. And so I'm constantly asking myself, why does it feel like half the country hates me personally? Like what are they so afraid of? And I think that, I mean, I've got lots of theories, and I think the biggest thing in my mind is that it's really easy to fear what you don't know. And as the queer community has gained so much recognition and so much visibility over the last 10 to 20 years, the trans community is, I think, the sort of the most invisible part of the queer community that people know the least about. So when you have folks that want to stir stuff up and maybe gain power through generating fear and hate, it's easy to make people hate what you don't know. And so by making it into the boogie person, right, into this thing that we have to be so scared of, it is a way, I think, for people to generate this false fear, because they're dehumanizing us. If these folks could just see that we're just people just like everybody else, we're human beings. I mean, I think that is the key to getting rid of that fear. And it's being manufactured in order to gain power. That's my theory.
I would add in general that, I mean, we're in an age that the same sort of narrow definitions of what constitutes a man, what constitutes a woman, whether it's genetically, biologically, or what their social roles are and how they behave, all of that has changed tremendously. And if you look at that globally, there's anger about all of those things, right? And there's activity and legislation, and outbursts around all of those things. And so the transgender community probably is the easiest one to hate, right? Because that encompasses all of that. So you're not just doing one thing wrong, you are challenging all of those beliefs. So of course, that would be the scariest. Of course, that would be because of course, then where do you fit, right? Like you can't, what box would they put you in after you have changed their understanding, not just of one normal quote unquote concept, but of all of the above. So I think it's part of an even larger discomfort with challenging, historical understandings and roles in society.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that I think that it is a threat to the kind of existing order, right, of things, which tends to be pretty rooted in patriarchy with a delightful side of misogyny. And I think that I mean, just being even when we kind of zoom out a bit, a lot of what we think about and talk about and what is kind of embedded in just general homophobia, transphobia is misogyny at the end of the day, right? And so it is this like, we want women, we love women, we like women in this box. If you can just kindly fit yourself in this box, right? But if you deviate from that, then the whole continuum is disrupted, right? So if women aren't in this box and we know that women are here, then that upsets our understanding of what it means to be male and what it means to be a man, right? And that is the chief societal role, right? So anything that kind of threatens that and makes us kind of all over the place becomes very disorienting, I think, and frightening for folks. And the initial response to that is anger, pushback, defensiveness, and attacking versus actually sit with, have hard questions, ask yourself hard questions, and to really kind of learn about what's happening. And so, I think that there's so much learning to do, right? There's so much learning to do. So I want to kind of talk a little bit about all the different kinds of things that can be included under the umbrella of gender affirming care. And so, you mentioned before, hair plugs, or, you mentioned something about hair. Well,
Yep.
there are a lot of cis folks out there. Like we see, getting, implants, getting hair pieces. I mean, when I was in Glasgow, the number of ads that I saw for big, fluffy ginger hair pieces was shocking to me. Like it took months for my social media to stop showing me hair pieces for men in that lovely ginger color. But that's something that air quote, everybody kind of gets in on. So let's talk very broadly about, what are some of those things that are included in gender affirming care. We can certainly talk, maybe we start with things that specifically maybe affirm those who's are looking for a different kind of affirmation, in the sense that their bodies don't feel like, as I explained it to my daughter one morning at an airport, way too early in the morning, their insides don't feel like their outsides.
Right.
Right. So what are some of the things that kind of fall under this umbrella?
Well, I think it's super easy.
Yeah.
So you drive down the street. Well, I don't know what your street is like, but there's plenty of places that have signs outside that say low testosterone, come on in.
Morning.
There's testosterone clinics everywhere. In the late 90s, early 2000s, it was Bob Dole with his little blue pill. You've got people who are doing Rogaine and Propecia to try to maintain their hair. There are people who are injecting not just testosterone but anabolic steroids for weightlifting because they're trying to get buff sooner because they have a particular version of what things look like to have that sort of really masculine look. And in fact, people even go so far as to gender affirm their trucks as well, if you know what I'm referring to. But there's a lot of stuff on that side of things if you're paying attention. I think probably everybody's Facebook or Instagram feed is bombarded with ads for hymns, trying to give people all kinds of gender affirmation in a pill or a spray. So, from the standpoint of people doing things that aren't just gender expression related, but are really kind of trying to give the chassis a full workover, from like the male side of things, that stuff's everywhere. From a femme or female side of things, there's also examples of that literally everywhere. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you are someone whose idealized state is less hairy or less hirsute, then, like hair removal, hair, whether it is laser, whether it is Nair, whether it is um, um, razors, for women, then they make them pink and charge 30% more. Um, like, all of these kinds of things. Yeah. Anything else? Other things to weigh in on, Dane?
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, it gets sticky when you start talking about, we're talking about the same procedures. Let's say, I go to my doctor and want to get a hysterectomy for my gender affirming care and find that my insurance isn't going to cover it because I'm a trans man, whereas, my wife could go to the same doctor, same insurance, and they'll cover it because she needs it for medical reasons. So you really are, or if she has an issue or endometriosis or whatever it is. So I really think that's going to be something interesting to watch in the future is, we talk about gender affirming care and it's sort of vilified as this thing that the trans community and the non-binary folks should not be allowed access to, when the rest of the population, that's standard of care. So we
Right.
really need to keep an eye on that and think very clearly before we start legislating these things, because it could very easily backfire on the rest of the population.
Yeah.
And
well,
in fact already has started to.
Yeah.
and I have never seen hundreds of protesters lying down in front of clinics offering breast reductions. And yet the same procedure that's being done for top surgery is being done on a routine basis on, tens of thousands of women with really no complaint
Yeah.
from any activist.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, various kinds of plastic surgery, but there's also, again, getting back to this, the pushback around it. So, I can't believe I'm gonna make another like Drake reference, like just like I can't believe I'm about to do this. But for any hip hop folks that like paid attention to, we're in June last month's like Kendrick Lamar, Drake brouhaha, one of the things was, one of the shady things that folks keep bringing up is that Drake has kind of had plastic surgery for a BBL, Brazilian butt lift, and for folks that don't know what a BBL is, and then like he's had some lipo and sculpting and a spray on ab situation.
So
Right.
what?
Right, exactly.
Good
I mean,
good for him.
Right.
right. And I'm like, well, I mean, he's Drake. I hope he's got a good surgeon. Good luck, Godspeed, go on. Like, but it is this thing, and it is, and it's something that in the rap beef became this huge diss that is deeply misogynistic, but also deeply anti-trans. It's very, this idea that these are women's procedures. Like women are supposed to get lipo to make abs. And they're supposed to be shapely, so go get your bum done, right? And so there's this, this acceptance that these are things that are designed to affirm women and make women feel better and closer to their idealized state of what gender should look like for them. But oh my goodness, this male rap star from Canada went and had, this work done, and it is something to shame him for, right? Why can't, fluffy guys go get some abs and a nice derriere? I don't, no comment.
Well, I mean, I would just say that, I hope that as this kind of stuff continues to sort of become part of the mainstream conversation, if you can, I guess a rap beef is kind of the beginning of that, right? It's getting towards mainstream. I think that these kinds of conversations will have more exposure, and it's just kind of exploding our brains around what is gender and what, and really kind of drilling down on the fact that gender is a construct. It's, it's a human construct that then it is really up to each of us to have our own take on what each of us feels our gender is. And so that's kind of my hope, is that we're going to, through these kinds of conversations, hopefully get away from the, or unpack the misogyny and unpack the transphobia and really kind of gain a broader acceptance for, yeah, it's your choice. It's your body.
Yeah.
I think the comment I'll add to that, I mean, you follow rap, I follow fashion. So like one of the actors that one of the big fashion houses just brought on, they brought him on because he was always carrying around Balenciaga purses. And so they brought him on as one of their new, like, house representatives, and he'll wear nail polish all the time. He'll put on skirts. A lot of the actors are doing all that stuff now, right? Like they all wear bags and they all wear nail polish and all this stuff. So they cross that. They don't recognize the constraints of gender for what they think is beautiful and what they want to wear to express themselves. The problem with this is that it's like very rich people who can kind of do whatever they want, and it's an expression of art or having as much money and influence that they can do whatever, right? And I think some of what Dane was talking about earlier is that if he wanted a medical procedure that was expensive, the average American couldn't just go out and do that. But like Drake could, right? Because he's got millions of dollars and he can do whatever he wants. And so that's really, perhaps that's really the line. So I also think that I'm making an overgeneralization here, which perhaps I shouldn't do. But some of the people who perhaps push back the most against some of what we're talking about, some of these issues about gender identity and transgender and policies around it, perhaps aren't the ones who look to Drake or the fashion houses or the people that are, influencing those spaces for to also be influenced themselves. So, who are the people that need to be the leaders in those spaces, and what are the conversations, or what are the policies, and who are the people that are going to influence the policies that actually make the change for the everyday people that really need it, right? And are going to benefit the most from it.
you bring up such great points around kind of the fashion piece of it, because of course I'm thinking about folks like Billy Porter, who is just really over the top, wears femme clothes very, more times than not. Harry Styles being on the cover of a magazine in a skirt is like so courageous, brave, and cutting edge. Is it? It's a skirt. Like, everybody calm down, right? Or Coleman Domingo, who tore up the red carpets during award season. He was the star of the movie Rustin, about the planning of the March on Washington. And I mean, like, capes and like, I mean, the fashion was fashioning, right? But they were recognized for this these expressions, but they were still firmly identified as cis males, right? They might be gay, but they might be. Oh yes, go ahead, Ewan.
Well, and I just want to say for a second, like our society idolizing flexes and gender expression is hardly new. Like anybody who likes the 70s hair band and their Doc Martens that are up to their knee level and bright purple with flames on the side. I mean, come on. Lots of y'all out there really liked Queen. Like people like World Wrestling Federation or whatever they've styled themselves now, which is hyper gender expression. We were just chatting about this at work the other day. Or Lucha Libre, another great example of hyper stylized out there gender expression. And the outfit that I'm wearing today with all these pinks in the early 1700s or mid 1700s in France, like this would have been extremely tame.
Yes.
It
And
historically
pink was originally
speaking,
conceptualized as a male associated
right.
color.
Like let's not say any of this is new or bold or strange. Like I'm pretty sure that when people were banging rocks together in caves, they were, putting together some pink fabric and trying to see how that would look on fur. It's human nature.
Yes. I'm thinking of all the like pigments now, like, like out picking berries and stuff to dye their skins. So if it's something that in some sense, in some ways, we all participate in, right? We are all seeking to affirm ourselves in some way, right? And gender is a part of the ourselves bucket. Um, what is it about this language, gender affirming care, and its very specific association with the non binary trans community that prevents us from just normalizing that this is care that makes us emotionally and medically feel good about our bodies, ourselves, who we are, and how we walk through the world? Why is it so hard?
That's the $24,000 question, right? I mean, it's not, to me, it makes perfect sense, but I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier, is that it is being, it's the whole like anti-trans, anti-queer push by the, right-wing conservatives in this country is designed to drive a social wedge and to create more divisions. I mean, I really believe that. And I think that, it's unfortunate that that's the case. And I think if half these people just knew that we're all human beings and we're doing this just to be who we are authentically, it would be such a much better world.
Yeah.
And I mean, realistically speaking, there's a big chunk of these people who know that we're human beings already because we've been at the same bars that they have.
Yeah.
I mean, the reality is that also there's always been an uncomfortable relationship between those who fear things in themselves and the communities that they really don't want to admit that they're a part of. And I do also think that's an important piece to recognize. You know, a great documentary on Netflix is to go and watch the documentary on the El Dorado in Berlin. But you could also read Christopher Isherwood's books that inspired Cabaret and recognize that this is a world that people lived in where they were very familiar with trans people, with non-binary people. You know, we go back to you know, look at places like the Harlem Renaissance, and there were non-binary and trans people in society too. And we get to these inflection points that follow big times of economic crisis and disease, and people are looking for something to latch onto, to be angry at that isn't looking at the economic realities surrounding them. And I think, unfortunately, the trans and non-binary community are low-hanging fruit, just as other communities have been low-hanging fruit in the past, including the rest of the LGBTQIA community.
Yeah, that's a really important point as we think about, you know, I'm not, it's hard for me to even be like after the pandemic, because I'm not like sure when it like there's a gray area there, right? But your point is well taken in the sense that, you know, we've kind of come out of this global thing. And like, you know, I tell people, I'm like, you know, after the worst of it, we got to come back outside and nobody knew how to act outside anymore. Like, we don't know how to behave in other people's company anymore. People are a lot more brusque, a lot more rude, a lot more intolerant, it feels, post pandemic, if that's really kind of where we are. Yeah, right, exactly. We're in that gray area because I mean, literally, I know like 3 people in the last week that have had COVID. So I'm like, I don't know. It seemed like that during the height of things too. But you and I also wanted to just say that you were like dropping mics today because first there was the shady gender affirm their trucks, and then it was like we saw you at the bar. So I see you over there being mad shady today. But there's truth in that, right? We fear sometimes what we see in ourselves reflected, right? In the world. And so I want to pivot a bit and talk a bit about, you know, diversity across animal species, right? And I think that folks often are like, can't we go back to a kinder, gentler world where, you know, um, the sex hormones, the, you know, male, female, there it is, that's it, and animals are just that, right? They identify like they don't identify as a gender, they're just that, right? Um, so is that total reality? I don't know. I'm not the veterinarian on here. I just host a show.
I think I mean, there's lots of examples of sexual dimorphism in nature and chimeras, and I'm sure Sam probably has a lot more access to this stuff than I do. But I mean, in my mind, again, like I said earlier, gender is a construct of human nature, I guess, or human functioning in the world. And I mean, I don't really believe that animals have gender roles. I think we anthropomorphize that onto the animal population. And for me, like the sexual dimorphism that exists in nature and the fact that you have male seahorses raising their young and male penguins sitting on eggs, whatever, it's just adding to that explosion of gender doesn't mean anything, right? It's just adding to that idea that it's, you know, it's up to each of us to express our own gender, however that may look. And I think that diversity that you see in the animal kingdom is, in my mind, a support of human beings should be allowed to be whoever they are in whatever way they want to be.
Yeah. Sam, thoughts?
Well, there's so many ways I think you can enter into that. Yeah, I'm not going to give a lecture on pseudohermaphroditism in horses or free Martinism in cattle or calves. But yeah, we see that. We see that sort of we see the biological expression of intersex, and also the effects of sex hormones when when one twin gets exposed to the other one and it comes out and has the twin is phenotypically altered, and also biologically altered as a result of that. So that's its own thing, right? But I thought about a couple things. I thought about the way that we interact with sex, and the sex of an animal, and maybe the manipulation of that gender, if I can say it that way, in our roles as veterinarians. So I'll talk a little bit about large animal because that's what I do. I mean, so there are plenty of horse owners that spend a lot of money on trying to manipulate the behavior of their horses using hormones or using surgical procedures. If you talk about the dairy and beef industry, you're talking about billions and billions of dollars being spent on not just hormones to try to synchronize estrus cycles in cattle, but in the technology that allows you to select the sex of your semen to AI your cows so that you can preferentially select what you're going to get, right? And so the ability to determine sex, right, to make that choice, which is the choice essentially you're not being able to make, is also making people, at least when it's making them money, billions and billions of dollars. So I get that it's a different thing, that people are not equivalent to animals in a lot of different ways, and that's not the conversation, but that's an interesting dichotomy, right? And then when we sterilize animals all the time, which essentially takes away the thing that many people would say is the determinant of what makes someone a woman and someone else a man. Yet we identify those animals as the gender that they were, right? Yeah. And I think many of the same people that would perhaps say that Dane is not a man and Ewan is a man, even though that's not how you both identify, would be very happy to say that their female dog that they spayed or their male dog that they neutered is in fact what they are, because that's how they identify as them, regardless of how they've been biologically altered. So I threw a lot of things out there, and so it's a complicated discussion, but it presents an interesting lens through which you could, I don't know, does it help people accept the conversation? Probably not, but is it an interesting way to introduce the topic? Maybe. I really have no idea.
I mean, I do think that this capitalistic acceptance of hormonal treatments to make production easier, to make whatever the desired outcome an easier path, right? It does not consider the kind of some of these parallels, right? And it makes me, for me as a DEI practitioner, it makes me go, if there was way more money in this, it would not be an issue. Like, if there was way more money in this, and I'm sure there's already a lot of money in it, but if there was way more money in this, to make it seem, for those health professionals delivering this care, if they were seen in this kind of society as, here's a need I'm fulfilling, and certainly they already fulfill this need. But if we were talking big numbers, then I think from a capitalistic perspective, we'd be like, wait, that's cool. We're good with that. Yay. Like, right? Because there is an additional kind of byproduct of economic boom, whereas we're not seeing that. The flip side of it is if we're thinking about men then becoming, then men, or how we cis straight folks might see men then becoming women. Well, we know that we already pay women 70 cents on the dollar. That's not good economic sense, right? For people who are looking at it through these very narrow lenses, right? It becomes less advantageous. But, we promote spay neuter because there's lots of really good reasons to promote spay neuter. And so it's a widely accepted practice that is also, not saying people are making a huge amount of money specifically on spay neuter, but it's not a little bit. It's not a little bit. It's a common procedure, right? And so I also found it really interesting, Sam, that the castration or just the spay neuter does not change the way that we as humans conceptualize what we think about and how we think about gender for our pets, right? Because to Dane's point, we've already anthropomorphized them, and I mean, as someone who has a whole Etsy shop just devoted to pet clothing, like they're still buying the dresses. They're still gonna buy the dress for Becky the poodle. That's still going to happen. And we just did a show a few weeks ago on DNA and the ways in which we are also kind of applying identity to our pets. Like a mutt can't just be a mutt. So it's a mutt can't just be a mutt, and you've spayed said mutt, but not this, but you're still kind of following this contrived gender thing, right? It's just very messy.
It is. It's complicated.
Well, and
yeah, go ahead, Ewan.
No, sorry, Dane, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, I was just going to make a joke about now they're just a mutt with nudicles, but that's a whole other story.
What a bum. Ewan.
Well, I was just going to say, I think what makes things complicated in my mind is that, we talk about gender being a social construct, and that's very true because there are other cultures, including cultures literally right at the border of the United States, within our borders in Canada, that are, First Nations and Native American peoples who have multiple genders within their cultures, not just two-spirit individuals, which is its own complex concept, but also, people in Oaxaca, within Thailand, where there's multiple genders, and other societies. When you talk about things from a chromosome perspective, you have people who 1 in 500 births of quote unquote male children have XXY chromosomes. That's 1 in 500 people, including myself. When you talk about things from a parts perspective, we don't look at someone who is a double amputee who has lost their external genitalia as not being a man or woman because of that. We don't look at people who have had breast cancer and have had double mastectomies as no longer being female. And we don't look at men who have erectile dysfunction as no longer being male. And so when we look at things in categories of gender expression, we recognize that gender expression is incredibly flexible. Gender is incredibly flexible. Parts are incredibly flexible. Chromosomes are incredibly flexible. The only thing that's not flexible in this entire conversation is one particular mindset within several industrialized countries. And that mindset is coming out of a tradition that inherently barred the idea of there being anything but a dichotomy, and anything else needed to be burned to the ground. And we're still dealing with that.
Yes. You are really dropping bars today. Dropping bars. Thank you for that. Thank you. Because you're absolutely right. This is all kind of, not kind of, but this is all contrived, right? It's all contrived. Why isn't medical care just medical care? And you know, some of the things that you mentioned that, you know, are experienced across folks, we fall over ourselves to try to find a medical answer to, right? And yet, this particular one, where there are medical answers because they already exist, because straight cis people need them, right? Like for air quote other reasons that we don't say is gender affirming, but inherently are, right? And so so thank you for that. So we're just about out of time. So I'd really love to hear from you. You know, what is one thing that you want our viewers and listeners to think about when they are pondering gender affirming care, you know, out in the wild, but also professionally?
I would just say to think about how essential it is, and that this is really needed and necessary for trans youth, for non-binary youth, for kids to really be able to be who they are authentically. And I think without gender affirming care, we really are, you know, increasing the rates of suicide for trans and non-binary and LGBTQ plus youth and adults even. So I think that's the main take-home point for me, is that this is a matter of life and death for a lot of folks in our community. And we need to be there to support and to make sure that everyone has access to gender affirming care.
Sam or Ewan?
I'll go next because I think whatever Ewan says, I don't want to have to go after it.
She's on a roll today. On the roll today.
So I'm clearly the person with the least personal experience around this, but I think what I would say is, for the people who are like me, which is most people who have the least personal experience, and for the people who are not like me, that have to struggle to get to a place of acceptance. You know, I've spent a lot of time researching and talking about the concept of what's called role congruency. What is a woman supposed to, what is their role supposed to be in the world? What is a man's role supposed to be in the world? And the idea that that is not how we should think about men and women in society, and certainly not in veterinary medicine, right? Because we're already sort of a wonderful example of how gender doesn't necessarily have to fit into specific roles, because we're so imbalanced and becoming a much more nicely mixed mosaic of different identities and such in this profession. So I would encourage people to try to let go of what their concept of gender roles are in society, and that will be a great step towards understanding that gender is an identity and not a role, and not a definition of something specific, whether it's genetics or phenotype, or the role you play in the world. So
thank you for that. Ewan.
So I say this fairly frequently, but the terrible truth of all this is that trans, non-binary, and gender non-conforming people are just people, like incredibly boring, normal human beings. And I think the sooner that people recognize that their actions are harming incredibly boring, normal human beings, the better. Finn and I joke about our trans agenda being getting the laundry done and making sure that we've paid the gas bill. Like, most people's agenda is just living their lives and being human beings. And I think there's a tendency to think of trans, non-binary, and gender non-conforming people as mythical beasts, and for that matter, mythical beasts you wouldn't want to run into. And the reality is that that could be your sister or brother or mom or dad or cousin, or the person you sat next to on the bus minutes ago, or a kid you helped with their homework last year. I think the sooner that people get to realizing that, the better this will be, and the more people will be horrified at the way in which they've behaved.
Mm. Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Yes, yes. So my big takeaway, and is that I think that folks should listen more and talk less, and listen more, talk less, practice grace and empathy. We talk a lot about it, but I don't see it that often, right? And then, as the internet will tell you, and so would my grandmothers Annie and Naomi, minding your business is free. Like, it's like minding your business is actually free. It is. And promoting access to medical care, whether it's human med or vet med, is really important. These are things that are deeply meaningful, that raise our populations to another level in terms of having access to get the care that they need, whether that is air quote gender affirming or not. But our curiosity has turned into something different that is very harmful. I think there's a lot of curiosity, and people want to ask questions that are none of your business. It's just none of your business. And if you really insist on it being your business, I promise you that there is somebody on TikTok right now who will tell all their business, and you can go and ask them questions. I promise you, I see them every night. Like, I scroll by because that's not my business, and I don't need to spend time there. So, I think that if you are in relationship with people experiencing things, and you have the type of relationship that facilitates deep questions and conversations, then you can lean into that. But just like out in the wild, minding your business is actually free, as is Google. So with that, I am happy to thank my guests, Ewan Wolff, Dane Whitaker, and Finn Morello. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
For participating in this conversation. And again, happy Pride to all who celebrate. Also, happy Juneteenth. Juneteenth is coming up, and we won't have a show before that. So happy Freedom Day, Independence Day as well. And with that, we will log off for another time. Be sure to follow the podcast on your favorite podcast app. And subscribe on YouTube or on audio, and let us know what you think about the episodes. Thanks so much, and we will